when I talk about being too far gone, this is what I mean. This is what I mean by hair loss. And it just keeps getting worse. It keeps thinning. It keeps receding backwards. I don't really see me personally being able to come back from what's happened so far.
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So you may have come across a viral video recently that I also came across from an individual named Casey Miller. Casey began transition at age 15 and is now 21 and is regretting going through hormones and surgery. Now the video was pretty emotional. It was very vulnerable, and you could tell that Casey is going through a lot of anguish, mental turmoil over this. And of course, the community that validates everyone can't find it in their heart to validate Casey, is absolutely shitting on Casey. I haven't seen actually this level of hatred, bullying, dogpiling on anyone in a while. And honestly, when I do see this level of it, it pretty much always ends very tragically. I'm not willing anything here, but as you'll see in the video, like the things that are coming out of trans influencers, trans activists' mouths about this young person who has opened up in a way that most people could never find the courage to ever do is disgusting. I also have an exclusive interview with Casey that will be later in this video, so stay tuned for that. Before we get into the reactions from the trans community, which are absolutely going to give me an aneurysm, let's watch the video and see exactly what Casey did wrong.
Hey y'all, so I got out of my haircut because my hair was driving me nuts, and I shaved it because I'm tired of watching my hair thin out, and it's less distressing if I shave it. So when I talk about being too far gone, I don't really know what else to call it. This is what I mean. This is how deep my voice is. It's gotten deeper over time, and it's settled. This is what I mean by hair loss. And it just keeps getting worse. It keeps thinning. It keeps receding backwards. You know, and I'm not exactly sure that's coming back. Those are the main things when I talk about being androgenized to a point of no return. I really don't see those being fixable. So that's when I talk about, you know, just kind of staying how I am, regardless of how I feel. That's why, just because I don't really see me personally being able to come back from what's happened so far. So I hope that's a little explanatory, just to kind of give a little bit more of a, like, kind of let me reword that, just to kind of, you know, talk about, like, give more awareness to the situation.
So, first thing, just a correction to Casey. You weren't given hormones as a woman, you're given hormones as a girl. You were 15. How many times do I have to say on this channel that minors can't consent? Like, that's just the most spoken sentence on this channel, I can only assume. If anyone is shocked that a 15-year-old is capable of making a permanent lifelong decision that they may regret upon growing older and smarter and wiser, you've either never been 15 yourself or you have never met a 15-year-old. And Casey didn't say anything in the video about how trans rights need to be stripped away, right? Casey didn't say anything about how transition as an entire concept is wrong or immoral. My transition didn't work out, so therefore other people shouldn't be allowed to transition. But of course, the hysterical, disgusting reactions would imply that Casey said all of those things. So let's get into it. Ty Turner, who is apparently a YouTuber, said, "I also started hormones as a teenager. 8 years later, I'm a full-grown man with a full head of hair. Sorry, bald," waving emoji. Wow. So what you're gonna see in the interview later on the video with Casey is that Casey grew up watching all these trans YouTubers, and I can only imagine what it must feel like to come to the spot that Casey's at, having watched all these people, idolized all these people, looked up to these people, and now they're all taking this opportunity in your moment of weakness, by the way, when you look like you're borderline in tears in the car, talking about the mental anguish and trauma that you've endured here, taking that opportunity to just on you. And then Ty tried to walk it back after a small amount of backlash from his own audience and said, "Bald is hot." Interesting how you didn't say that to KC. And don't you think KC would be the person who would need to hear that a little more, right? Why couldn't you have said something like, "Hey, don't worry, like, all is not lost. Like, yeah, you've balded and your hairline has receded quite a bit, but bald is still hot and you're still attractive and everything's fine." No, your reaction was to shit on him rather than try to comfort him. Because of course, the trans community doesn't give a about anyone trans, detrans, or anyone who just doesn't toe the line. Right up until the point that you say anything they disagree with, anything they find remotely harmful, for which the barometer for that is just consistently lowering, then they're the most loving, tolerant community of all. But then the second you go off script, you're a piece of shit and we're gonna shit on you. Spooky Maddie Cakes, really dumb name by the way, says, tell me you don't understand how hormones work without telling me you don't understand how hormones work. Casey Miller is a joke. Actually, this tweet is a joke because the expectation for Casey to have a full-fledged understanding of hormones, the effects the hormones would have on his body at age 15, and how that would be long-lasting and permanent, is the joke. Casey was a literal child when put through the pediatric transition pipeline. And guess what? We just saw Ty Turner, who apparently is very happy with his transition. I'm an example of someone who's happy with my transition. Ty said he started as a minor. That's great. But if you can't understand, acknowledge, or comprehend the fact that a good chunk of these people who start this as a minor are going to have regrets, you've either never met a 15-year-old or you've never been 15, one of the two. This is why you don't transition kids, because it's playing with fire. Dominic says, really frustrating to see people like Casey Miller gain 14K followers in a month for spreading lies and misinformation regarding medical transition, when I know at least 10 trans men who have been cultivating their platform based on positivity and resources with little to no traction. Yeah, because there are just no trans people who gain followings off of painting transition as a fairy tale and as a positive thing with no downsides. Oh yeah, that's every trans influencer. ContraPoint says the person in this video doesn't even identify as a detrans woman.
A few minutes later.
Oh! He's posting, look what hormones do to teen girls, because it's clickbait for bigots. Is it clickbait when it really happened? Pretty sure clickbait is like, this is what hormones do to teenage girls, and it's a result that is false, and the person never actually went on hormones. This is a literal 15-year-old who went on hormones, and this is the results. What about that as clickbait? And yeah, anyone concerned that 15-year-olds are going on hormones that permanently alter their body and are concerned about the ramifications of that, they're just bigots. Totally. What is this, 2016? Everyone who disagrees with me is a bigot? Okay. She goes on to say, no one cares when boys go bald, but girls invoke the myth of precious white female flesh defiled, irreversible damage. It is irreversible. And there was damage that took place. And people who experience that have every fucking right to talk about it, just how you have every right to talk about how great your transition was, right? But the difference is no one can criticize that. They can only criticize the clearly mentally anguished person in their car talking to an audience of what he assumed at the time before going viral was probably like 6 people, right? I love how everyone has sympathy for gender dysphoria unless it's occurring in someone who transitioned and then regrets it, right? There's this narrative that gender dysphoria is so bad that people kill themselves over it, right? But this person's clearly experiencing what is objectively gender dysphoria. He's unhappy with the secondary sex characteristics, and everyone's shitting on him for it. And it really is crazy how fragile your identity must be if you see someone else struggling in theirs and think that that's somehow an attack on you, right? And it's not as if, because granted, if all these people and all these little trans influencers were attacking Casey because Casey was saying things like, my transition didn't work out, so no one should be able to. My transition went this way, so all transitions are bad. Guess what? I'd have an issue with that too. Casey didn't say any of that. Casey clearly is just upset in a car talking about how he's too far gone. By the way, language like too far gone is a bit dark for me, right? That's kind of what people say at the end of their rope. But this is the way the cults operate. You parrot exactly what they want you to parrot. You say and do exactly what they want you to say. And you are valuable and you are special and you are loved up until the point where you disagree with them or diverge even slightly, go off script even slightly. And it's also very telling how they have to twist his words to attack him. They have to pretend as if he's attacking transition in general, rather than just talking about his own experience. All trans experiences are valid, right? Until it goes wrong, and then you're a threat, and then you're a problem, and you have to be stamped out. It's such transparent, disgusting behavior, and I don't understand. Like, this is reprehensible to me. And by the way, I've only shown you a few responses to Casey. There are literally thousands of disgusting messages that I wouldn't even put on YouTube, on Twitter, going towards Casey, from people that are trans influencers with millions of followers to people that don't have followings. It's just the most insane hive mind behavior, because it is a hive mind. They are a fucking collective. They don't think for themselves. And I could go on for days about it, but I want to get to the interview with Casey. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Casey. So I came across your extremely viral video on Twitter where like you have just, how many million views is it at? Like,
I think it's at least 5 million at this point.
right. So you've been making waves, and the video was very emotional. The video was definitely you getting very personal about the details of your transition, and you have been getting dogpiled in a way that I have not actually seen in a while. So why don't you tell people what your message was in the video and how it's being misconstrued, and just give us the rundown?
Okay, so I started Twitter kind of from the perspective of questioning my own transition, or at the very least, trying to support detransitioners. And I was kind of just contemplating on Twitter, like the day before, like, okay, I'm not super uncomfortable with where I'm at right now, but obviously there's been physical changes from the testosterone that I can't reverse. I don't feel like I could present in society as a woman at this point. And of course, people were just like, no, you can do whatever you want. You can just come off tea and everything will be fine. The hair's not that bad. Your voice isn't that bad. So I made the video to prove a point, because I'm like, look, my hairline's super receded. My voice is deep. Like there's only so much I could come back from this and let that be socially acceptable.
Right.
So it was kind of just an explanation, and it wasn't really meant to kind of stand on its own. But then, of course, I forget what side of Twitter got to it first, but then it kind of went on the more conservative side and the detrans side and like the gender critical side. And then it hit the trans Twitter and it was taken in its own, like just kind of in isolation. And that's where everything kind of happened.
So, but what I think the important part here is that when you transitioned, you began as a minor.
Yes.
And that's the key point that, first of all, I've been very upfront and honest. I don't know how much you know about my channel, but when it comes to transitioning, I don't believe minors can consent to transition. I think that it's way too big of a thing for them to properly understand. Would you say that you were not able to consent to transition when you began?
Looking back now, absolutely not. Not just from the minor perspective, but also I was dealing with a lot of mental health issues. Um, I actually I began kind of questioning myself in May of 2017, and in December of 2016, I went inpatient psych care. I admitted myself because I was going to do something really stupid if I didn't, and I knew that that kind of wasn't an option. So I went inpatient over Christmas and kind of came back out and was trying to figure things out. So this was all kind of in the wake of a very traumatic event and kind of a crisis point. Um, and I was always struggling, and it was really contested when I did seek care at a gender clinic of whether or not this was the right decision, at least on my end. But we were kind of going to the experts because I'm like, I don't know, I have this idea, but you got to look at it and see if you can make the right clinical call here.
Right. When it comes to transitioning, you rely heavily on experts, not you specifically, but everyone, because it's an area that a lot of people aren't very informed about. But the problem with that is that the experts are often even more uninformed than the patient, even when the patient is young. My biggest thing with all of it is it just seems like everyone's just kind of fumbling around in the dark and saying, yeah, do this and do that, and it'll fix this and it'll fix that. But a very common thread among detransitioners and someone such as yourself, which is more of a transition regretter, is you guys seem to have these other issues that are not being taken into account, not being addressed, and completely overlooked. So that is in and of itself a huge problem. And when it comes to a lot of these trans influencers, it's really fascinating to me how they run these channels, which, I'm not going to say they blatantly tell people to transition, right? But they often present a very false picture of what transitioning is. They lean more towards glamorizing it and towards only showing, the success stories and the positives of it, and never the negatives. And then you have these young people who follow in their footsteps, not necessarily saying you, but then the second it comes to someone regretting, it's like, well, actually, fuck you, and we're going to bully you, and we don't care how it affects you. 2 seconds ago, we cared about you and you're special, and now we don't care.
Yeah. And actually, the thing that, getting all of the hate that I have and the harassment on Twitter and across social media platforms, I'm only on Twitter, but I've seen from other people that apparently they're talking about me on TikTok, they're talking about me on YouTube, Twitch, I'm everywhere apparently.
Mhm.
Seeing random people with like a blank profile picture tell me to kill myself isn't the bad thing. What kind of hurt actually was seeing like these major trans influencers that I watched pre-transition in the beginning and going on in my medical transition, and I looked up to, because I thought, well,
Mhm.
it got better for them, it's going to get better for me. And seeing them just blatantly flip and just completely misconstrue the video, like call me bald and all of this stuff and kind of dogpile, that was kind of like, wow, I thought you were a good person. I thought that you had like great intentions, and maybe you do, and you're just acting out of anger, but this isn't a good look.
The justification they seem to be saying for attacking you is that you are trying to strip away trans rights, that you are trying to take away the ability for others to transition because yours didn't go as you had maybe planned. Is that true?
No, not at all, and I've tried, and I kind of I'm still trying, but I'm somewhat giving up, to make it clear that I'm not coming after trans rights. I don't think that trans healthcare is unnecessary or a lost cause. I think it is very necessary for some people, but at least talking in, like, the pediatric population with kids and teens and even vulnerable young adults, the current model that we have isn't working because enough people are slipping through the cracks. Even if we could hypothetically say that there are some kids that maybe they are experiencing true gender dysphoria and we can medically transition them and they're not going to regret it 10, 20 years down the line, and maybe there's no medical consequences to this, we can't tell the difference because, I'm not a unique case. I only spoke out because I'm seeing, all of these other detransitioners that went through the pediatric transition pipeline, kind of look back and go, wow, this was the wrong decision. And here are all of the other red flags that they ignored.
Right. And one thing I found really just like disgusting is how a lot of these trans guy influencers are taking it as an opportunity to compare their transition to yours and to say, well, I have a full head of hair, so why are you complaining? Blah, blah, blah. You should have known. The whole you should have known thing. How should you have known? You were a kid.
Exactly. And I even talking, and this is kind of the disturbing thing, I give some of like the trans influencers a little bit of grace, like some of the younger ones. I'm probably a little bit more forgiving than I should be. Because, secretly they're wondering, is this something that I'm going to have to face? I have a full head of hair now, or maybe I'm experiencing the precursors of baldness or some of the side effects. Is this something I'm going to have to face later? But especially talking with like some of these full-fledged adults that don't understand the concept that children are not equipped to make adult level decisions, that there's just a fundamental difference between a child's brain, even a teen's brain, and a fully developed adult's brain. It's ridiculous. It's mind-boggling to me.
And what's interesting is like, have these people, first of all, never been a kid themselves and never met a kid in their life? Like, are they just living this existence where they've never been around kids to understand that they have less of an ability, if not a complete lack of ability to make long-term decisions? This is just a simple like reality of what it is to be a young person. So it'd be one thing, not that I would ever condone the level of attacking on you, but it'd be one thing if you really were on screen saying, I transition as an adult, the results weren't good, so I don't think anyone should be able to transition. This is basically what they want you to be saying, right? Because it gives them a reason to actually attack you. But the reality is you were a kid who had no idea what they were getting themselves into. And the fact that this is the community that is so loving and tolerant, and this is the community that, stands by its own. No, it's a cult. It's 100% a cult. You and I were conversing in DMs when it first happened because I was seeing all this hate, and I was like, there's no way this person is doing okay. I hope you are doing okay.
I mean, I've had some ups and downs. It wasn't because of Twitter. It was because of just my own mental health. I mean, Twitter didn't help, but it wasn't directly because of the hate. It was just kind of working through my own stuff. But yeah, I remember I was like, I don't understand why everybody's wigging out. And you literally just typed, you poked a cult.
Yeah, you did. I believe you completely poked a cult. And the thing about these people is their entire reality, their entire livelihood, their entire identity is based upon a very specific narrative, right? That's why it's so rigid. That's why you follow the rules to the T or you are banished. And you see it with even trans people like myself who don't follow the narrative, but still are trans and happy and whatever. And you see it with people like yourself who are like, wait, there are some problems here. They will never tolerate that. And I think that goes to show the mentality that this isn't about the facts. It's not about actually helping people. It's about having this in-group in this cult that they need to prop up their entire reality.
Yeah, I mean, the standpoint that I'm coming from, because I do have somewhat of a clinical background and I am going to school for social work. I was previously in nursing school and just, having experience in the behavioral health system, is that emphasizing throwing meds and surgery at a mental issue, or potentially giving kids the wrong medical treatment for something they could work through in psychotherapy. And the fact that psychotherapy, even if you look at WPATH Standards of Care 8, they don't really emphasize it at all. They say it's not really necessary, even in the pediatric and adolescent model. That frankly, for me, and I think for a lot of people, transition didn't make a difference for me. The only reason I'm functional today is because of psychotherapy. And I feel like we're doing a disservice to our youth. This is not about, detransitioning trans kids and trying to push people out of existence. It's our youth deserve better quality care, and they deserve not to be medicalized against their will. That's just the standpoint I come from it, at least.
Right. And one of the things that I've really learned from talking to so many detrans people is that there are a lot of them, and you can tell me if this is the case for you or not, a lot of them seem to have a bit of a traumatic relationship with their birth sex. Like they go into transitioning almost to run away from their birth sex because they have whatever issues with it. And the really interesting difference there, and that I've noticed with other people who are trans and seemingly happy and whatever, like Buck Angel, myself, others, is like I never went into transition with the intent of like, oh, I hate my birth sex. I want to run away from that. It was more like, I think I would be happier this way. I'm feeling this very specific, medical situation happening. It was never like this traumatic, like running away from being biologically male, which is another reason why I don't understand why I'm supposed to hate it. What was your relationship with your birth sex when you started transitioning? Like, what was that about?
So I had a really complicated relationship, mainly because I was not like a typical femme girl. I had PCOS. I was like a pretty blocky build, like I was a rectangle. And I did have more hair growth, and I kind of looked more masculine, but I was still clearly female. And from childhood experiences of being sexually abused and kind of emotional abuse and purity culture within the fundamentalist church, for me, it made the idea of growing up to be a woman very undesirable. And I was grappling with my sexuality, and I thought I was a lesbian at the time. And frankly, I felt like my mom wouldn't tolerate me or, associate with me if I got into a relationship with a woman as a woman. So I figured and this wasn't the overt reasoning, but looking back on it, I think this was a main reasoning was, well, instead of being a lesbian, why can't I be a straight man? I fit more of the stereotypes. I, dress masculinely. The way I've dressed hasn't really changed much at all from when I was a teenager. I wear most of the same clothes. And I thought, well, I walked over into the men's section once I came out, and I was allowed to cut my hair because I wasn't allowed to cut my hair unless I was going to be a boy. That's kind of, the fundamentalist way of thinking. Everything fit off the rack easier in the men's section than it did the women's section just because of my build. And I thought, well, then it's meant to be. And even now having conversations with my mom, because she knows I'm questioning things, she goes, I said, well, which one would you have been more accepting of, me being in a straight relationship now versus me, still presenting as a woman, like, not transitioning and being a lesbian? And she goes, I'm not sure I could have accepted that.
Wow.
So
I really am just fascinated by how many detrans people, and again, I know you're not taking that label necessarily, have that it's almost this internalized homophobia of like, I don't want to be gay, let me be straight. And it sounds, maybe if you're not in it, a little hard to understand, but like it seems to be with everyone at this point that I've spoken to. Every single one has had some sort of self-hatred. Hatred's a strong word, but some sort of discomfort with the fact that they are perceived as gay, and this is their way to enter the straight world. And I get it as someone who has transitioned, and I never fit in the gay world, but I also never had like a hatred for being perceived as a gay male. I was just like, it is what it is. But then moving to the straight world, it was definitely, a huge change, and you can attest to that as well. So that's like just fascinating to hear that it really boils down to a homophobia problem in some ways, at least.
Yeah. Oh, and also plot twist. And I talked with Buck Angel about this. After a long enough period on testosterone, my sexuality changed. So, I mean, right now at this point, I don't like anybody because I'm on antidepressants and it completely kills my libido and any desire. But um, before that, before a med change, I then identified as a gay man. So that completely just that idea that I had that I was just going to be a straight guy and just live my life was dashed against the rocks.
Wow. So what is the message that you actually want to get out that the trans activists are so desperate for you to not actually get out?
Um, I think that I know that we need to focus on therapy and fixing other problems that kids and teens and young adults are having instead of jumping the gun and saying, well, you're trans, here's your surgery, here's your hormones. Because I was fast tracked. Like within 6 months of me starting hormones, I had top surgery. It was done. And that was within several months of first contact. I had 2 appointments because the idea was, well, he's going to kill himself if we don't do this, right? For me, I think we need to stop pathologizing the normal teenage experience and
Yes.
the whole teenage angst thing, because I thought that being trans meant you were uncomfortable with your body and that was a uniquely trans thing. Well, I found out from talking with people that that's not a unique trans thing. Everybody's uncomfortable with their bodies. And instead of moving to change ourselves to better fit what society's expectations of us are, I think in some respects the trans community needs to practice what they preach and talk about self-love and self-acceptance. They say trans bodies are good bodies, trans bodies are valid, but also, well, what if we don't have to change our bodies? What if there's another way? Sorry, I'm trying to think of how to do this
No, I
cohesively.
know what you mean because it's almost as if it's not almost as if it is as if they have these completely contradictory statements. It's trans bodies are beautiful, trans bodies are valid. You don't need to have surgery to be trans, but also we're going to fast track these kids into having these surgeries. I mean, how old were you when you got your top surgery?
I was 17.
See, I don't. To me, this is what I struggle with the most, and I say this to everyone I talk to in this situation. I struggle so much to understand, first of all, why it's bad to talk about this. And second of all, how other people don't see it. I don't understand how people don't understand the negative reality of letting kids consent to these life-changing surgeries. To me, it's like a simple 1-2, like 1 + 1 = 2. And it's just like it doesn't process to them. And I know the argument is, well, trans people usually or always wish they would have transitioned earlier so they could pass better, which, first of all, you can pass transitioning as an adult. It's done all the time. And second of all, why exactly are we prioritizing looks and an aesthetic and features over fertility, over having your body parts intact until you're able to decide for sure if you actually want to alter them? What is happening?
Um, I can understand the perspective that they don't want people to suffer more, if they could prevent that suffering. And if we could, from the medical model, if we can look at a certain illness and intervene sooner, then less damage will be done, right? But in reality, we're potentially causing more damage, with puberty blockers. I was fortunate enough to not be on puberty blockers. I'd already been through puberty. But with the testosterone and the top surgery, all right, my breasts are gone, like they're gone. Luckily, that's not a big selling point for me. That's not like a huge problem for me, but I'm not sure I can come off hormones. I'm not sure if I did want to detransition, I could ever have kids. I'm not even sure that my female reproductive system works because it was dysfunctional before hormones and now I've suppressed it for almost 5 years. Um, so I can empathize with trying to intervene sooner to reduce psychological stress, but it's coming at the cost of physical harm.
Right. And that's not a trade-off that, again, you can just consent to make as a kid. You have really famous examples such as Jazz Jennings. Jazz Jennings was portrayed as the poster child for trans kids, right? Famous at a very young age, ended up being, into the process of blockers and hormones and surgery before she was even 18, all of it. And because she was on puberty blockers, she didn't actually develop enough to be able to reuse her, flesh and body parts to make a proper vagina, and had to go through all these revisions. So if the argument is that puberty blockers are suddenly going to make a transition easier, I don't even think Jazz Jennings could vouch for that. Seems to have made her transition a whole lot harder.
Honestly, I really do feel bad for Jazz, and I feel bad for people like Jazz. It's interesting that, she was supposed to be set up as this poster child, but sometimes you can't hide what reality is. And certainly when I was investigating transitioning, and, I did see documentaries about kids that were on puberty blockers and so on, there were no bad cases. It was especially like with trans girls that were on puberty blockers. Oh, they stopped the male puberty. They went through female puberty. They got bottom surgery at like as soon as they turned 18, and everything was fine, no complications. They just reintegrated into society. It was this rosy thing, but she's had the spotlight on her for so long. And if she's going in and out of surgery again and having issues, I like how you can't spin that.
You on Twitter had mentioned that you noticed similarities between the fundamentalist environment that you grew up in and the trans community. And that's what I've always said. I come from a very small, very religious, like rednecky town where I grew up. And my earliest memories were of thinking that that was really, really intense and crazy to be a part of. And I definitely see similarities with the trans community. So do you want to elaborate on that?
So specifically in my church, it wasn't like full on cult, but there was definitely a lot of control and a lot of strict interpretation of the Bible. Of course, there was cherry picking, but strict interpretation that focused on control, specifically with the youth too, and our youth pastor. So, very big on controlling what media we had access to. It was through guilt. Of course, they weren't, physically exerting themselves, but, the phrase, I think it's a scripture somewhere, fill your mind with things that are good, means that you should limit all secular media to only the necessities. So, it was frowned upon to listen to anything except Christian music, which Christian music isn't a fun time. Even the contemporary stuff. You should be reading Christian authors, Christian media, Christian newsletters. You should be limiting the amount of regular TV that you're watching, pigeonholing. We would talk about different religions, but it was from the standpoint of studying the enemy. I even brought this to my associate pastor, and I said, well, I have a friend that's Mormon at school, and, she's talking about the differences between the Bible and the Book of Mormon. And she gave me a book. She's not trying to convert me, but we just want to be able to discuss it. Would you be willing to have a discussion based on what I read? And he goes, you can't read that book. That's spiritual warfare. It
Wow.
will corrupt your mind. And I said, can I not read any religious text? And he goes, no, because it's going to corrupt your mind. So, this hyper vigilance and control of, what can and can't be said. You could say certain things, and there are other things that you couldn't say. You had to stay in your place and you had to behave a certain way. And it was this big narrative of peace and love, and that we love everybody just as Jesus had loved us. But at the moment that you break the narrative, the moment that you commit like a big no-no that you're not supposed to, you're pushed out.
Right. And that's
And
exactly what happened to you.
yeah, that is exactly what happened. And the reason that I left the fundamentalist church was only because I was transitioning. Though somehow I was hanging on as a closeted lesbian, even though I was enduring sermons where I was literally being told, this sounds horrible, but the Muslims were doing something right by throwing gays off of buildings. Somehow I was enduring that, but I'm like, okay, there's no way I can hide this whole transition thing. Like, I got to get out of here, and, out from
Pretty
one
interesting.
situation into another.
Right. And pretty interesting point to make. You just mentioned Islam. Interesting how in a lot of Islamic countries, they transition gay people to fix gay people. And that seems to be what's happening here in the States. But when it happens there, it's called homophobia. And when it happens here, it's called love intolerance.
Yeah.
Very interesting comparison to make. I made it, not you, but it's
Yeah.
Wow. Where can people follow you?
So right now I'm mainly just on Twitter, at Casey Miller 1225. I also recently started a Substack where I'm just going to be writing about my experiences and hopefully using my valuable college education that I rant about sometimes on Twitter, and kind of just looking at the structure of the trans cult and how we got here, and just kind of comparing some of my experiences and just laying it all out in a longer format. I'm still getting the hang of all of this, so
Okay. Well, you're doing amazing. Like,
thank
you're
you.
a rock star.
I don't know how, but I am.